Thank you for choosing the audiobook. Today's chapter is about the summary of the Law of Human Nature written by Robert Greene. Before we start, hit that subscribe and like button now and open the door to a world of literary wonders. If you come across any special trait of meanness or stupidity, you must be careful not to let it annoy or distress you, but to look upon it merely as an addition to your knowledge, a new fact to be considered in studying the character of humanity. Your attitude towards it will be that of the mineralogist who stumbles upon a very characteristic specimen of a mineral, by Arthur Schopenhauer. Abstract: we feel increasingly bored. Not really engaged in our work, we turn to various distractions to occupy our restless minds. But by the law of diminishing returns, we need to continually find new and stronger forms of diversion, the latest trend in entertainment, travel to an exotic location, a new guru or cause to follow, hobbies that are taken. Study subjects 415 BC. Several Athenian leaders. Nothing remotely like this had ever happened under Pericles. Then, after so many years of a war without end, in 415 BC several Athenian leaders had an interesting idea about how to deliver the fatal blow. The city-state of Syracuse was the rising power on the island of Sicily. Scholarcy highlights: if you come across any special trait of meanness or stupidity, you must be careful not to let it annoy or distress you, but to look upon it merely as an addition to your knowledge, a new fact to be considered in studying the character of humanity. Your attitude towards it will be that of the mineralogist who stumbles upon a very characteristic specimen of a mineral. Scholarcy Summary Introduction: if you come across any special trait of meanness or stupidity, you must be careful not to let it annoy or distress you, but to look upon it merely as an addition to your knowledge, a new fact to be considered in studying the character of humanity. With that awareness, we would be able to break the negative patterns in our lives, stop making excuses for ourselves, and gain better control of what we do and what happens to us. Having such clarity about ourselves and others could change the course of our lives in so many ways. But first we must clear up a common misconception. We tend to think of our behavior as largely conscious and willed. We feel the impulses of the higher self when we are drawn out of ourselves, wanting to connect more deeply with others, to absorb our minds in our work, to think instead of react, to follow our own path in life, and to discover what makes us unique. Man will only become better when you make him see what he is like. The Law of Irrationality. You like to planning. Imagine yourself in control of your fate, consciously the course of your life as best you can. You are largely unaware of how deeply your emotions dominate you. They make you veer toward ideas that soothe your ego. They make you look for evidence that confirms what you already want to believe. Rationality is the ability to counteract these emotional effects, to think instead of react, to open your mind to what is really happening, as opposed to what you are feeling. It does not come naturally, it is a power we must cultivate, but in doing so we realize our greatest potential. The Inner Athena. One day toward the end of the year 432 BC, the citizens of Athens received some very disturbing news. Representatives from the city-state of Sparta had arrived in town and presented to the Athenian governing council new terms of peace. In the earliest years of their democracy, before Pericles had appeared on the scene, the Athenians had preferred a certain personality type in their leaders, men who could give an inspiring, persuasive speech and had a flair for drama on the battlefield. These men were risk-takers. They often pushed for military campaigns that they could lead, giving them a chance to gain glory and attention. It would be wise to incorporate all three into your study and practice in human nature. Step 1. Recognize the biases. Emotions are continually affecting our thought processes and decisions, below the level of our awareness. The most common emotion of them all is the desire for pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Our thoughts almost inevitably revolve around this desire. We recoil from entertaining ideas that are unpleasant or painful to us. We imagine we are looking for the truth, or being realistic, when we are holding on to ideas that bring a release from tension and soothe our egos, make us feel superior. This pleasure principle in thinking is the source of all of our mental biases. It is best to search and see how they continually operate inside you, as well as learn how to identify such irrationality in others. Confirmation bias. I look at the evidence and arrive at my decisions through more or less rational processes. To hold an idea and convince ourselves we arrived at it rationally, we go in search of evidence to support our view. Because of the pleasure principle and its unconscious influence, we manage to find the evidence that confirms what we want to believe. If people considered the possible negative and positive consequences, they might find it hard to take any action. They veer toward information that confirms the desired positive result, the rosy scenario, without realizing it. We see this at work when people are supposedly asking for advice. Conviction bias. I believe in this idea so strongly. Those, on the other hand, who express nuances, whose tone is more hesitant, reveal weakness and self-doubt. They are probably lying, or so we think. This bias makes us susceptible to salesmen and demagogues who display conviction as a way to convince and deceive. They know that people are hungry for entertainment, so they cloak their half-truths with dramatic effects. Appearance bias. I understand the people I deal with. I see them just as they are. We see people not as they are, but as they appear to us. People have trained themselves in social situations to present the front that is appropriate and that will be judged positively. They seem to be in favor of the noblest causes, always presenting themselves as hardworking and conscientious. If a person is successful, we imagine they are probably ethical, conscientious, and deserving of their good fortune. This obscures the fact that many people who have gotten ahead have done so through less than moral actions, which they cleverly disguise from view. The group bias. The feeling of isolation, of difference from the group, is depressing and terrifying. We experience tremendous relief when we find others who think the same way we do. We are motivated to take up ideas and opinions because they bring us this relief. We are unaware of this pull and so imagine we have come to certain ideas completely on our own. If someone is on the right or the left, their opinions will almost always follow the same direction on dozens of issues, as if by magic, and yet few would ever admit this influence on their thought patterns. The blame bias. I learn from my experience and mistakes. We want to learn the lesson and not repeat the experience. Our natural response is to blame others, circumstances, or a momentary lapse of judgment. The reason for this bias is that it is often too painful to look at our mistakes. It calls into question our feelings of superiority. If people truly learned from their experience, we would find few mistakes in the world and career paths that ascend ever upward. Superiority bias. I'm more rational than others, more ethical as well. Few would say this to people in conversation. We are quick to ascribe to them all kinds of Machiavellian tactics. This allows us to justify whatever we do, no matter the results. We feel a tremendous pull to imagine ourselves as rational, decent, and ethical. These are qualities highly promoted in the culture. Rationality and ethical qualities must be achieved through awareness and effort. Step 2. Beware the inflaming factors. Low-grade emotions continually affect our thinking, and they originate from our own impulses, for instance, the desire for pleasing and comforting thoughts. High-grade emotion comes at certain moments, reaches an explosive pitch, and is generally sparked by something external, a person who gets under our skin, or particular circumstances. The more we think about the emotion, the stronger it gets, which makes us focus even more on it, and so on and so forth. Because we are unable to bear the tension this brings, high-grade emotion usually culminates in some rash action with disastrous consequences. It is best to be aware of these factors so that you can stop the mind from tunneling and prevent the releasing action that you will always come to regret. You should be aware of high-grade irrationality in others to either get out of their way or help bring them back to reality. Trigger points from early childhood. In early childhood, we were at our most sensitive and vulnerable. Our relationship to our parents had a much greater impact on us the further back in time we go. Sometimes we try to repress the memory of these influences if they happen to be negative, great fears, or humiliations. Sometimes they are associated with positive emotions, experiences of love and attention that we continually want to relive. A sudden illness, brought on by the intense fear, will conveniently cause us to have to leave the scene. It could be love, desperately searching to recreate a close parental or sibling relationship in the present, triggered by someone who vaguely reminds us of the lost paradise. It could be extreme mistrust, originating from an authority figure in early childhood who disappointed or betrayed us, generally the father. This deep understanding of ourselves and our vulnerabilities is a key step toward becoming rational. Sudden gains or losses chemicals are released in the brain that give a powerful jolt of arousal and energy, leading to the desire to repeat this experience. It can be the start of any kind of addiction and manic behavior. We become especially resistant to anyone who tries to warn us. They don't understand. We tell ourselves, because this cannot be sustained, we experience an inevitable fall, which is all the more painful, leading to the depression part of the cycle. Gamblers are the most prone to this. It applies to business people during bubbles and to people who gain sudden attention from the public. Rising pressure. The people around you generally appear sane and in control of their lives. Put any of them in stressful circumstances, with the pressure rising, and you will see a different reality. The cool mask of self-control comes off. They suddenly lash out in anger, reveal a paranoid streak, and become hypersensitive and often petty. Stress or tension can reveal flaws in people that they have carefully concealed from view. Whenever you notice rising pressure and stress levels in your life, you must watch yourself carefully. Never imagine that you are someone who can withstand rising stress without emotional leakage. Through self-awareness and reflection, you can prevent yourself from making decisions you will come to regret. Inflaming individuals. There are people in the world who by their nature tend to trigger powerful emotions in almost everyone they encounter. Some of them can be quite narcissistic. They project their internal drama and troubles outward, catching other people up in the turmoil they create. This leads to profound feelings of attraction in some and repulsion in others. A good strategy to utilize is to see through the front they project. They inevitably try to cast a larger-than-life image, a mythic, intimidating quality, but they are all too human, full of the same insecurities and weaknesses we all possess. Try to recognize these very human traits and demythologize them. The group effect. This is the high-grade variety of the group bias. When we are in a group of a large enough size, we become different. Being in a group does not stimulate independent reasoning, but rather the intense desire to belong. This can happen in a work environment if the leader plays on people's emotions to spur competitive, aggressive desires, or creates an us versus them dynamic. They begin by warming up the crowd, talking about ideas and values that everyone shares, creating a pleasant feeling of agreement. They rely on vague but loaded words full of emotive qualities such as justice or truth or patriotism. Demagogues in politics or the media try to stir a continual sense of panic, urgency, and outrage. They must keep the emotional levels high. The great golden age of Pericles, with its philosophers and its first stirrings of the scientific spirit, was followed by an age of superstition, cults, and intolerance. This same phenomenon happened after the Italian Renaissance. Feeling superior and beyond it is a sure sign that the irrational is at work. Step 3. Strategies toward bringing out the rational self. Despite our pronounced irrational tendencies, two factors should give us all hope. First and foremost is the existence throughout history and in all cultures of people of high rationality, the types who have made progress possible. These include Pericles, the ruler Asoka of ancient India, Marcus Aurelius of ancient Rome, Marguerite de Valois in medieval France, Leonardo da Vinci, Charles Darwin, Abraham Lincoln, the writer Anton Chekhov, the anthropologist Margaret Mead, and the businessman Warren Buffett, to name but a few. All of these types share certain qualities: a realistic appraisal of themselves and their weaknesses, a devotion to truth and reality, a tolerant attitude toward people, and the ability to reach goals that they have set. If people try to interrupt or infect us with emotions, we resent it. These moments, as fleeting as a few weeks or hours, reveal the rational self that is waiting to come out. He applied his training as a doctor to the human animal, his goal to understand what makes us so irrational, so unhappy, and so dangerous. In his stories and plays, he found it immensely therapeutic to get inside his characters and make sense of even the worst types. Trust your feelings, but feelings are nothing final or original. Behind feelings there stand judgments and evaluations which we inherit in the form of inclinations, aversions. The inspiration born of a feeling is the grandchild of a judgment, and often of a false judgment, and in any event not a child of your own. To trust one's feelings means to give more obedience to one's grandfather and grandmother and their grandparents than to the gods which are in us, our reason and our experience. The law of narcissism. We all naturally possess the most remarkable tool for connecting to people and attaining social power: empathy. When cultivated and properly used, it can allow us to see into the moods and minds of others, giving us the power to anticipate people's actions and gently lower their resistance. This instrument is blunted by our habitual self-absorption, some deeper on the spectrum than others. Our mission in life is to come to terms with this self-love and learn how to turn our sensitivity outward, toward others, instead of inward. We must recognize at the same time the toxic narcissists among us before getting enmeshed in their dramas and poisoned by their envy. The narcissistic spectrum. From the moment we are born, we humans feel a never-ending need for attention. We are social animals to the core. As those who have gone through long periods of isolation can attest, without eye contact we begin to doubt our existence and to descend into a deep depression. This need is deeply psychological. Through the quality of attention we receive from others, we feel recognized and appreciated for who we are. When it comes to other people in their lives, deep narcissists have an unusual relationship that is hard for us to understand. They tend to see others as extensions of themselves, what is known as self-objects. Lacking the self-esteem thermostat, they are prone to continually worrying about what others think of them. This makes it hard to focus attention outward for long periods of time, and to deal with the impatience and anxiety that comes with work. The deepest principle of human nature is the craving to be appreciated. For examples of narcissistic types, part of his charm lay in the fact that he epitomized the revolution. He was a man of the people, rough and a bit rude, but someone an average Russian could identify with. Interpretation: the great riddle that Joseph Stalin and his type present is how people who are so deeply narcissistic can be so charming and, through their charm, gain influence. How can they possibly connect with others when they are so clearly self-obsessed? After Grandier's gruesome execution, which profoundly affected the other nuns, who certainly felt guilt at the part they had played in the death of an innocent man, Jean alone felt the sudden lack of attention as unbearable, and so she upped the ante by refusing to let go of the demons. She had become a master at sensing the weaknesses and hidden desires of those around her, first the prioress, and the exorcists, and Father Surin. Since appearances are what people judge you by, you must learn how to present the best front and play your role to maximum effect. The second language. One morning in August 1919, 17-year-old Milton Erickson, future pioneer in hypnotherapy and one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, awoke to discover parts of his body suddenly paralyzed. If people said yes but really felt no, it appeared to show up in their grimaces and body language. On another occasion, he watched closely from the corner of his eye as one sister offered another an apple, but the tension in her face and tightness in her arms indicated she was just being polite and clearly wanted to keep it for herself. Interpretation: for Milton Erickson, his sudden paralysis opened his eyes to a different form of communication and a completely different way of relating to people. When he listened to his sisters and picked up new information from their faces and voices, he registered this with his senses and felt himself experiencing some of what was going on in their minds. For these purposes, there are three aspects to this particular law: understanding how to observe people, learning some basic keys for decoding nonverbal communication, and mastering the art of what is known as impression management, playing your role to maximum effect. Observational skills. We were almost all great observers of people. Because we were small and weak, our survival depended on decoding people's smiles and tones of voice. Once you succeed in this simple exercise with one person, try it with someone else, always focusing on the face. Once you find it easier to notice cues from the face, attempt to make a similar observation about an individual's voice, noting any changes in pitch or the pace of talking. Related to the baseline expression, try to observe the same person in different settings, noticing how the nonverbal cues change if they are talking to a spouse, a boss, an employee. For another exercise, observe people who are about to do something exciting, a trip to some alluring place, a date with someone they've been pursuing, or any event for which they have high expectations. Taken far enough, such powers can make you seem almost psychic, as they did with Milton Erickson. Decoding keys. Remember that people are generally trying to present the best possible front to the world. People give out clear indications in their body language of active dislike or hostility. These include the sudden squinting of the eyes at something you have said, the glare, the pursing of the lips until they nearly disappear, the stiff neck, the torso or feet that turn away from you while you are still engaged in a conversation, the folding of the arms as you try to make a point, and an overall tenseness in the body. Hess and others, people who feel positive emotions for you will display noticeable signs of relaxation in the facial muscles, in the lines of the forehead and the area around the mouth. Their lips will appear more fully exposed and the whole area around their eyes will widen. These are all involuntary expressions of comfort and openness. Save your alertness for those situations in which the stakes are higher and people might be angling to get something valuable out of you. The art of impression management in general. The word role-playing has negative connotations. We contrast it with authenticity. A person who is truly authentic doesn't need to play a role in life, we think, but can be him or herself. This concept has value in friendships and in our intimate relationships, where, hopefully, we can drop the masks we wear and feel comfortable in displaying our unique qualities. Life in the public sphere means wearing a mask, and sometimes some people wear the mask of authenticity. Even the hipster or the rebel is playing a role. With prescribed poses and tattoos, they do not have the freedom to suddenly wear a business suit, because others in their circle would begin to question their sincerity, which depends on displaying the right appearance. I can never bring you to realize the importance of sleeves, the suggestiveness of thumbnails, or the great issues that may hang from a bootlace. The law of compulsive behavior. When choosing people to work and associate with, do not be mesmerized by their reputation or taken in by the surface image they try to project. It is what compels them to repeat certain actions in their lives and fall into negative patterns. Look closely at such patterns and remember that people never do something just once. Gauge the relative strength of their character by how well they handle adversity, their ability to adapt and work with other people, their patience and ability to learn. Always gravitate toward those who display signs of strength, and avoid the many toxic types out there. Know thoroughly your own character so you can break your compulsive patterns and take control of your destiny. The pattern uncles and grandparents who watched him grow up in Houston, Texas. Howard Hughes Jr. was a rather shy and awkward boy. The boy seemed in awe of his father, Howard Sr., who in 1909 had started the Sharp Hughes Tool Company, which would soon make the family a fortune. His father was not home much, always traveling for business, so Howard spent a great deal of time with his mother. To the relatives he could seem nervous and hypersensitive, but as he got older he became a remarkably polite, soft-spoken young man, completely devoted to his parents. Interpretation. The pattern of Howard Hughes's life was set from very early on. His mother had an anxious nature, and after learning she could have no more children, she directed a great deal of her anxiety toward her only son. With this firmly in mind, we can work on several key components to the skill, recognizing certain signs that people emit in certain situations and that clearly reveal their character, understanding some general categories that people fit into, and being aware of certain types of characters that often are the most toxic and should be avoided if possible. Character signs. The most significant indicator of people's character comes through their actions over time. They might try to excuse themselves, to say they lost their heads in the moment, but you can be sure they will repeat whatever foolishness they did on another occasion. Compelled by their character and habits, they will often repeat actions when it is completely against their self-interest, revealing the compulsive nature of their weaknesses. A person has a tremendous fear of being abandoned by the one they love, reflecting anxieties from infancy, and so they select a person who is noticeably inferior in looks or intelligence, knowing that person will cling to them no matter what. Another realm to examine is how people behave in moments away from work. People of real strength are as rare as gold, and if you find them, you should respond as if you had discovered a treasure. Toxic types. Each person's character is as unique as a fingerprint. We can notice throughout history certain types that keep recurring and that can be pernicious to deal with. If you happen to associate with this type more closely, you will see that it is something they cannot control. It is a compulsion to feel superior, not some higher moral quality in their childhood. A parent or father figure probably disappointed them. They try to find a sucker who will do all of the hard work in bringing to life their vague idea, but who will take the blame if it all goes wrong. Often such people had parents who were inconsistent, would turn on them suddenly for the smallest misdeed. Such children compensate for the lack of care that they receive with the feeling of power that they derive from the inverted relationship. This sets a pattern. They gain their greatest satisfaction from rescuing people, from being the caregiver and savior. The superior character. This law is simple and inexorable. You have a set character. It was formed out of elements that predate your conscious awareness. The other direction is harder to take, but it is the only path that leads to true power and the formation of a superior character. It works in the following manner. You examine yourself as thoroughly as possible. Through much introspection and work, she managed to transform these very weaknesses into the pillars of her highly successful career. She decided, for instance, to bring her own feelings of sadness and betrayal into all of the different roles she played, making women around the world identify with her. She was unlike so many of the other actresses, who were so falsely cheerful and superficial. The agonizing thing in life is that it is our own decisions that throw us into this rut, under the wheels that crush us. A decision, an action, are infallible omens of what we shall do another time, not for any vague, mystic, astrological reason, but because they result from an automatic reaction that will repeat itself. The law of covetousness, absence and presence have very primal effects upon us. Too much presence suffocates, a degree of absence spurs our interest. We are marked by the continual desire to possess what we do not have, the object projected by our fantasies. Learn to create some mystery around you, to use strategic absence to make people desire your return, to want to possess you. Dangle in front of others what they are missing most in life, what they are forbidden to have, and they will go crazy with desire. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Overcome this weakness in yourself by embracing your circumstances, your fate. The object of desire. In 1895, 11-year-old Gabrielle Chanel sat by her mother's bedside for several days and watched her slowly die from tuberculosis at the age of 33. As she progressed with this new persona, it became clear to her the nature of her vague longings. What she wanted was the power and freedom that men possessed, which was reflected in the less constricting clothes that they wore. She could sense that the other courtesans and women at the chateau could identify with this. This perfume would be as distinctive as her clothes, yet more ethereal, literally something in the air that would excite men and women and infect them with the desire to possess it. To accomplish this, she would go in the opposite direction from all the other perfumes out there, which were associated with some natural, floral scent. With so few people out there who understand the art of desirability, it affords you endless opportunities to shine and exploit people's repressed fantasies. Strategies for stimulating desire. The key to making this law work for you is to objectify yourself and what you produce. He carefully managed the frequency of his interviews and performances and never talked about the meaning of his lyrics or propagated any overt message. He occasionally had his publicists leak to the press some new stories surrounding him, such as his use of hyperbaric chambers as a way to maintain eternal youthfulness. This is why the work of great dramatists such as Shakespeare and Chekhov has lasted for so many centuries and always seems so fresh and exciting. Each generation can read into their plays what they want to. These writers describe timeless elements of human nature, but without judging or directing the audience to what they should feel or think. If you can somehow create the impression that others desire you or your work, you will pull people into your current without having to say a word or impose yourself. The supreme desire. Our path must always be toward greater awareness of our nature. We must see within ourselves the grass is always greener syndrome at work and how it continually impels us to certain actions. On the positive side, feeling restless and discontented can motivate us to search for something better and to not settle for what we have. It enlarges our imagination as we consider other possibilities instead of the circumstances we face. We can spend our life searching for the perfect man or woman and end up largely alone. Do not constantly wait and hope for something better, but rather make the most of what you have. Consider it this way: you are embedded in an environment that consists of the people you know and the places you frequent. Why, a dog will not bear being treated too kindly, let alone a man. The law of shortsightedness. It is in the animal part of your nature to be most impressed by what you can see and hear in the present, the latest news reports and trends, the opinions and actions of the people around you. Whatever seems the most dramatic, this is what makes you fall for alluring schemes that promise quick results and easy money. Learn to measure people by the narrowness or breadth of their vision. Avoid entangling yourself with those who cannot see the consequences of their actions, who are in a continual reactive mode. They will infect you with this energy. You will have the patience and clarity to reach almost any objective. Moments of madness. All through the summer and early fall of 1719, the Englishman John Blunt, one of the lead directors of the South Sea Company, followed the latest news from Paris with increasing anxiety. It was the patriotic duty of English creditors to participate in the scheme, since they would be helping to cancel the debt while potentially making much more money than the annual interest payments the government paid them. In this midst of this feverish buying and selling spree, there stood John Blunt at the pump, doing whatever he possibly could to stimulate the interest in South Sea shares and keep the price rising. He sold the stock in various subscriptions, offering generous terms of payment, sometimes requiring only a 20% advance to get in. Avoid deep contact with those whose time frame is narrow, who are in continual react mode, and strive to associate with those with an expanded awareness of time. For signs of short-sightedness and strategies to overcome them, most of us imagine that we engage in some form of long-term thinking. After all, we have goals and plans. We can see this most clearly when we talk to other people about their plans and strategies for the near and more distant future. We are often struck by their vagueness and the lack of deep thinking people generally give to such plans. They are more like hopes and wishes, and in the rush of immediate events, feeling pressure and the need to respond, such weak goals and plans are overwhelmed. In all of these cases, a simple move partway up the mountain would have made clear the possible negative consequences so obvious to us in hindsight. For example, offering a reward for dead cobras would naturally cause impoverished residents to breed them. In these cases, people's thinking is remarkably simple and lazy. Kill Caesar and the Republic returns. Action A leads to result B. Remember that greater control over events will come from realistic assessments of the situation, precisely what is made most difficult by a brain submerged in trivia. The farsighted human. Most of us live within a relatively narrow time frame. We generally associate the passage of time with something negative, aging and moving closer to death. Reacting to events in the present puts us on a roller coaster ride. Up and down we go with each change in fortune. This can only add to our anxiety, as life seems to pass so quickly in the immediate rush of events. Your task as a student of human nature and someone aspiring to reach the greater potential of the human animal is to widen your relationship to time as much as possible and slow it down. This means you do not see the passage of time as an enemy, but rather as a great ally. In relation to the past, you feel a deep sense of connection to your childhood. You derive even greater pleasure from reaching your long-term goals and overcoming adversity. This expanded relationship to time will have a definite effect on you. The law of defensiveness. We want to feel that we are independent, doing our own bidding. That is why when others try to persuade or change us, we become defensive and resistant. That is why to get people to move from their defensive positions, you must always make it seem like what they are doing is of their own free will. Creating a feeling of mutual warmth helps soften people's resistance and makes them want to help. Never attack people for their beliefs or make them feel insecure about their intelligence or goodness. That will only strengthen their defensiveness and make your task impossible. Make them feel that by doing what you want they are being noble and altruistic, the ultimate lure. Learn to tame your own stubborn nature and free your mind from its defensive and closed positions, unleashing your creative powers. The influence game. In December 1948, Senator Tom Connally of Texas received a visit from the newly elected second senator of the state, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Older senators, referred to at the time as old bulls, came to appreciate Lyndon Johnson. They held positions of great authority based on their seniority. They often felt insecure about their age and their physical and mental capacities. That he was sharing drinks with the more powerful senators, Humphrey's loneliness faded away. He felt compelled to return the favor and to get many Northern liberals to change their minds about Johnson, whose influence was beginning to spread like an invisible gas. By the time the leadership position opened up, Johnson had established tremendous credibility as someone who returned favors, who could get things done, and who had very powerful allies. His desire to get control over committee assignments represented a radical change in the system, but he carefully couched it as a way to enhance the Democratic Party and help individual senators in their various battles with Republicans. We might have to abide by the cultural prejudice and nod our heads in agreement about the need for complete honesty, but inwardly we must realize that this is nonsense and practice what is necessary for our own well-being. 5 strategies for becoming a master persuader. The following 5 strategies, distilled from the examples of the greatest influencers in history, are designed to help you focus more deeply on your targets and create the kinds of emotional effects that will help lower people's resistance. Many studies on nonverbal cues have demonstrated the incredible power that a simple touch of people's hands or arms can have in any interaction, making them think positive things about you without their ever being aware of the source of their good opinion. Such gentle taps establish a feeling of visceral rapport, as long as you do not maintain eye contact, which will give it too much of a sexual connotation. The idea is not to counter people's strong emotions, but to move with them and find a way to channel them in a productive direction. Use their language. The therapist Milton Erickson described the following case that he had treated. A husband came to him for advice. He seemed quite set on doing what he wanted anyway. To project one's soul into some gracious form and let it tarry there for a moment, to hear one's own intellectual views echoed back to one with all the added music of passion and youth, to convey one's temperament into another as though it were a subtle fluid or a strange perfume. There was a real joy in that, perhaps the most satisfying joy left to us in an age so limited and vulgar as our own, an age grossly carnal in its pleasures, and grossly common in its aims. Change your circumstances by changing your attitude. Each of us has a particular way of looking at the world, of interpreting events and the actions of people around us. This is our attitude, and it determines much of what happens to us in life. If our attitude is essentially fearful, we see the negative in every circumstance. We sabotage our career and relationships by unconsciously creating the circumstances we fear the most. By making our attitude more positive, open, and tolerant of other people, we can spark a different dynamic. We can learn from adversity, create opportunities out of nothing, and draw people to us. We must explore the limits of our willpower and how far it can take us. The ultimate freedom. Anton Chekhov, the future celebrated writer, faced each morning with a feeling of dread. Would he be beaten that day by his father or somehow spared? Without warning, and sometimes without any apparent cause, his father, Pavel Yegorovich, would strike him hard several times with a cane or a whip or the back of his hand. Work was no longer something he dreaded. He loved absorbing his mind in his studies, and tutoring had made him feel proud and dignified. He could take care of himself. Letters came from his family, Alexander ranting and complaining about their father making everyone miserable again, Mikhail, the youngest son, feeling worthless and depressed. Interpretation. The moment his mother left him to be alone in Taganrog, young Anton Chekhov felt trapped. As if he had been thrown into prison, he would be forced to work as much as he could outside his studies. The attitude that we carry with us throughout life has several roots. First, we come into this world with certain genetic inclinations toward hostility, greed, empathy, or kindness. We can notice these differences, for instance, in the case of the Chekhov children, who all had to respond to the same physical punishments of the father. On hearing of the interesting events which have happened in the course of a man's experience, many people will wish that similar things had happened in their lives too, completely forgetting that they should be envious rather of the mental aptitude which lent those events the significance they possess when he describes them. The law of repression. People are rarely who they seem to be. Lurking beneath their polite, affable exterior is inevitably a dark, shadow side consisting of the insecurities and the aggressive, selfish impulses they repress and carefully conceal from public view. Affable exterior is inevitably a dark, shadow side consisting of the insecurities and the aggressive, selfish impulses they repress and carefully conceal from public view. This dark side leaks out in behavior that will baffle and harm you. Learn to recognize the signs of the shadow before they become toxic. You must become aware of your own dark side. By integrating the dark side into your personality, you will be a more complete human and will radiate an authenticity that will draw people to you. The dark side. On November 5, 1968, Republican Richard Nixon accomplished perhaps the greatest comeback in American political history, narrowly defeating his Democratic rival, Hubert Humphrey, to become the 37th President of the United States. With Nixon, whenever he experienced stress or unusual levels of anxiety, this dark side would stir from deep within in the form of potent insecurities, suspicions, sudden outbursts and tantrums, and powerful desires to manipulate and harm those he believed had crossed him. Nixon would be said to have a thick shadow. When we experience those moments when people reveal the dark side, we can see something come over their face, their voice and body language is altered, almost as if another person is confronting us, the features of the upset child suddenly becoming visible. We feel their shadow as it stirs and emerges. Through such self-knowledge, we can find a way to integrate the dark side into our consciousness productively and creatively. In doing so, we become more authentic and complete, exploiting to the maximum the energies we naturally possess. Deciphering the shadow. Contradictory behavior. In the course of your life, you will come upon people who have very emphatic traits that set them apart and seem to be the source of their strength: unusual confidence, exceptional niceness and affability, great moral rectitude and a saintly aura, toughness and rugged masculinity, and intimidating intellect. We can see two forms of this. Early on in life, some people sense a softness, vulnerability, or insecurity that might prove embarrassing or uncomfortable. They unconsciously develop the opposite trait, a resilience or toughness that lies on the outside like a protective shell. The truth is that these types realize early on in life that they have aggressive, envious tendencies that are hard to control. It is best to not get too entangled with such types later on in their careers, as they have a tendency to bring about much collateral damage. The integrated human. In the course of our lives, we inevitably meet people who appear to be especially comfortable with themselves. If Richard Nixon in many ways epitomizes the inauthentic type, we find many examples of the opposite to inspire us. In politics, men like Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln. In the arts, people like Charlie Chaplin and Josephine Baker. In science, someone like Albert Einstein. In social life in general, someone like Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. These types indicate for us the path to follow, which largely centers on self-awareness. The less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The law of NVWE. Humans are naturally compelled to compare ourselves with one another. We are continually measuring people's status, the levels of respect and attention they receive, and noticing any differences between what we have and what they have. This need to compare serves as a spur to excel through our work. It can turn into deep envy, feelings of inferiority and frustration that lead to covert attacks and sabotage. Nobody admits to acting out of envy. You must recognize the early warning signs: praise and bids for friendship that seem effusive and out of proportion, subtle digs at you under the guise of good-natured humor, apparent uneasiness with your success. Learn to deflect envy by drawing attention away from yourself. Develop your sense of self-worth from internal standards and not incessant comparisons. Fatal friends. In late 1820, Mary Shelley, author of the novel Frankenstein, and her 28-year-old husband, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, moved to Pisa, Italy, after having spent several years traveling through the country. In early 1821, a young English couple named Jane and Edward Williams arrived in Pisa, and their first stop in town was to visit the Shelleys. They were close friends with one of Percy Shelley's cousins. As she thought about it more deeply, suddenly things began to make sense. The sudden coldness of Hogg, Leigh Hunt, and others who must have heard these stories, the looks Jane occasionally threw at Mary when she was the center of attention in a group, that look on her face when she threw Mary out of her house, the vehemence with which she wanted Mary to stay away from London and give up her child, which meant giving up their inheritance. All these years she had been not a friend but a competitor. And it seemed clear that it was not Mary's husband who had pursued Jane, but Jane who had actively seduced him with her poses, her coquettish looks, her guitar, her Pouton soft manner. Using all three decoding devices will increase your chances of detection. Signs of envy. The signs are subtle. Envious feelings tend to leak out and can be detected if you are observant. Gossip is a frequent cover for envy, a convenient way to vent it by sharing malicious rumors and stories. When they talk about others behind their backs, you will see their eyes light up and their voice become animated. It gives them a joy comparable to schadenfreude. What indicates active envy in this case is that they are your friend and they feel the need to vent their underlying hostility to a third party rather than keep it to themselves. The push and pull, as we saw in the Jane Williams story, enviers often use friendship and intimacy as the best way to wound the people they envy. They display unusual eagerness to become your friend. People want to bully and overwhelm you with something negative, both wounding you and covering any tracks of envy. Envier types. According to the psychoanalyst Melanie Klein, certain people are prone to feeling envy their entire lives, and this begins in early infancy. The self-entitled slacker. In the world today, many people rightfully feel entitled to have success and the good things in life, but they usually understand that this will require sacrifice and hard work. These slackers feel insecure about their ability to get what they want. That is why they have never really developed the proper discipline when they find themselves around high achievers who work very hard and have earned true respect for their work. This will make them aware of the doubts about themselves they have been trying to repress. They may admire their boss for some qualities, but deep down they believe they are entitled to have some of the attention he or she is getting. Without all the hard work, the longer they are around the high achiever, the more this feeling gnaws at them. Your time to shine will come, but not if you inadvertently stimulate their insecurities. Envy triggers. Certain types are more prone to envy. You must be aware that there are circumstances that will tend to trigger envy in almost anyone. The most common trigger is a sudden change in your status, which alters your relationship to friends and peers. This is true among people in your own profession. Keep in mind that people who are getting older, with their careers on the decline, have delicate egos and are quite prone to experiencing envy. Sometimes it is people's natural gifts and talents that will stir up the most intense forms of envy. If people with natural gifts possess a good work ethic and have some luck in life, envy will follow them wherever they go, often making it worse for such types. They tend to be quite naive. Since we are all more susceptible to feeling envy ourselves, we must learn how to manage this emotion within ourselves, transforming it into something positive and productive. Beyond envy, you will tend to deny that you ever experience envy, at least strong enough to act on. You can begin with a simple experiment. Time you hear or read about the sudden success of someone in your field, notice the inevitable feeling of wanting the same and the subsequent hostility, vague, toward the person you envy. It happens quickly and you can miss the transition, but try to catch it. The process of moving closer is twofold. On the one hand, try to look behind the glittering facades people present, and on the other hand, imagine the inevitable disadvantages that go along with their position. This is not the same as leveling them down. His own woundings he must nurse, and feel another's gladness like a curse. The Law of Grandiosity. We humans' opinion of have a deep need to think our goodness, greatness, highly of ourselves. If that and brilliance diverges enough from reality, we become grandiose. Often a small measure of success will elevate our natural grandiosity to even more dangerous levels. Our high self-opinion has been confirmed by events. We forget the role that luck may have played in the success, or the contributions of others. We imagine we have the golden touch. That is why our success often does not last. Look for the signs of elevated grandiosity in yourself and in others. Counteract the pull of grandiosity by maintaining a realistic assessment of yourself and your limits. Tie any feelings of greatness to your work, your achievements, and your contributions to society. The Success Delusion By. The summer of 1984, Michael Eisner, born in 1942, president of Paramount Pictures, could no longer ignore the restlessness that had been plaguing him for months. After so many years of sharing the limelight with Diller at Paramount, trying to please corporate CEOs, and pushing back against marketing directors and finance people, Eisner had had enough. If only he could run his own studio, unfettered. Puffed up by the attention he was receiving, Eisner had to imagine that he deserved the accolades he received strictly for his own efforts, and so naturally he subtracted from his success the elements of good timing and the contributions of others. His mind was subtly divorcing itself from reality. We find many influential people, such as Michael Eisner, with high-grade versions of grandiosity, where the attention and accolades they receive create a more intense enlargement of the self. The Grandiose Leader. If people with high levels of grandiosity possess some talent and a lot of assertive energy, they can rise to positions of great power. Their boldness and confidence attract attention and give them a larger-than-life presence. Mesmerized by their image, we often fail to see the underlying irrationality in their decision-making process and so follow them straight into some disaster. The trick grandiose leaders play is to place the emphasis on their cultural tastes, not on the actual class they come from. They may fly first class and wear the most expensive suits, but they counteract this by seeming to have the same culinary tastes as the public, enjoy the same movies as others, and avoid at all costs the whiff of cultural elitism. Practical grandiosity. Grandiosity is a form of primal energy we all possess. It impels us to want something more than we have, to be recognized and esteemed by others, and to feel connected to something larger. The attention we receive in this way is gratifying and keeps us energized, but the greater sense of gratification comes from the work itself and from overcoming our own weaknesses. The precise way to channel the energy will depend on your field and skill level. The following are 5 basic principles that are essential for attaining the high level of fulfillment that can come from this reality-based form of grandiosity. Your objective here is to enter a state of flow, in which your mind becomes increasingly absorbed in the work, to the point at which ideas come to you at odd hours. This feeling of flow should be pleasurable and addicting. Your goal with practical grandiosity is to continually look for challenges just above your skill level. For I thought I was capable of carrying on war against you, but I was no match for you. As I was without knowledge, I have my just deserts. The law of gender rigidity. All of us have masculine and feminine qualities. Some of this is genetic, and some of it comes from the profound influence of the parent of the opposite sex. In the need to present a consistent identity in society, we tend to repress these qualities, over-identifying with the masculine or feminine role expected of us. Our thinking and ways of acting become rigid. Our relationships with members of the opposite sex suffer as we project onto them our own fantasies and hostilities. You will become more fluid in your thinking. In bringing out the masculine or feminine undertone to your character, you will fascinate people by being authentically yourself. Do not play the expected gender role, but rather create the one that suits you. The authentic gender. A few evenings after she had taken over Sant'Angelo, wearing some armor over her gown, she marched along the ramparts of the castle. It gave her a feeling of great power, so far above the city, looking down at the frantic men below, helpless to fight against her, a single woman hobbled by pregnancy. Ludovico Orsi and his fellow conspirator Giacomo del Ronche marched Caterina up to Ravaldino. She was to order the castle's commander to surrender it to the assassins. As the commander she had installed, Tommaso Fio, looked down from the ramparts, Caterina seemed to fear for her life. What is most beautiful in virile men is something feminine. What is most beautiful in feminine women is something masculine. The law of aimlessness. Unlike animals, with their instincts to guide them past dangers, humans have to rely upon our conscious decisions. We do the best we can when it comes to our career path and handling the inevitable setbacks in life. How did we end up in this job, in this place? Such drifting can lead to dead ends. The way to avoid such a fate is to develop a sense of purpose, discovering our calling in life and using such knowledge to guide us in our decisions. We come to know ourselves more deeply, our tastes and inclinations. We trust ourselves, knowing which battles and detours to avoid. Even our moments of doubt, even our failures have a purpose, to toughen us up. With such energy and direction, our actions have unstoppable force. The voice. Growing up in a staunchly middle-class black neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, Martin Luther King Jr. had a pleasant and carefree childhood. He could not rationally explain where this came from, but it was clear to him. He would return to the South, where he felt a primal connection to his roots. He would become the minister of a large congregation in a good-sized city, a place where he could help people, serve the community, and make a practical difference. The key theme he had begun to develop was the power of love to transform people, a power that was desperately underused in the world and that blacks would have to adopt in relation to their white oppressors in order to change things. He became active in the local chapter of the NAACP, but when he was offered the position of president of the chapter, he turned it down. By the law of diminishing returns, we need to continually find new and stronger forms of diversion, the latest trend in entertainment, travel to an exotic location, a new guru or cause to follow, hobbies that are taken. Thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it so much mean to me.